There is a pressure that no instrument can measure, no chart can map, no equation can hold. It is not gravity that pulls you down toward the ground. It is not fatigue that rests in your muscles after a long day. It is something else, something silent, persistent, and far heavier than stone. It is a pressure that grows quietly in the background of your life, invisible to the eye, yet undeniable to the heart. This is the quantum weight. When you carry it, you breathe in fragments, never fully. You speak, yet something in your voice is muted. You walk, but each step drags on the invisible chain of memories, regrets, or words never spoken. Others may not see it directly, but they feel it. They sense the hesitation, the hidden burden behind your eyes. They notice the pauses that stretch a little too long, the way your laughter bends under the surface of unresolved gravity. This weight is not a single event. It is not one mistake or one wound. It is the echo of many moments compacted together, woven into a dense knot inside your field of being. Every unshed tear, every silenced scream, every compromise where you betrayed yourself, layer upon layer, they form a mass that bends the space around you. Life responds to that bend. People react to it without knowing why. Opportunities pass by, not because they do not exist, but because the field around you has tilted, directing your path toward repetition instead of renewal. The quantum weight is not punishment. It is not a curse laid upon you. It is the natural consequence of carrying what was never resolved, what was never given a voice, what was never allowed to transform. Just as matter cannot vanish, so too do unprocessed emotions linger. They condense, they gain density, they become a gravitational center within the psyche, and around that center, everything else begins to orbit. There comes a time in every life when this weight reaches a threshold. At first you ignore it. You tell yourself it will pass. You distract yourself with tasks, with relationships, with promises that tomorrow will be lighter. But the weight does not dissipate with distraction. It grows more compact. It presses harder against the edges of your presence. And then, without warning, a breaking point emerges. The breaking point is not dramatic on the outside. Sometimes it looks like silence at a dinner table when you cannot swallow another word. Sometimes it looks like waking at dawn with a chest so tight you cannot find the rhythm of breath. Sometimes it is a sudden collapse of interest in everything that once defined you. To others, it may seem small, even trivial. But inside, you know, the structure cannot hold as it is. The weight has reached critical mass. Something must shift, or something in you will shatter. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is not proof that you are broken. It is the signal of your own consciousness demanding reconfiguration. The breaking point is not the end. It is the announcement of transformation. Just as in physics, where energy shifts phase, water turning to vapor, metal bending until it redefines its shape, so too does the psyche reach its threshold. At that line, the only way forward is through change. Quantum weight is invisible, but it leaves signs. You recognize it in the patterns you cannot escape, in the conversations that repeat themselves like echoes, in the faces of people who always seem to mirror your old wounds. You feel it in the exhaustion that no sleep can heal, in the restlessness that no achievement can satisfy. You sense it in the silent tension of your body, the jaw that clenches without command, the shoulders that fold inward as if protecting the heart from an unseen storm. Every field bends under pressure, and the human field is no different. Your presence, the subtle resonance that others feel when they stand near you, is shaped by the weight you carry. Some call it aura, some call it energy, some simply call it atmosphere. Whatever the word, it is real, and it is inescapable. You may smile, you may perform, you may present strength, but the field does not lie. The field speaks in frequencies older than language, and the quantum weight distorts those frequencies, creating interference in the signal of your being. Yet, within this heavy truth lies an equally profound possibility. Because the weight is made of compressed experiences, it is also made of compressed wisdom. What you carry is not just pain, it is the raw material of transformation. The breaking point, though terrifying, is also the doorway. It is the moment where silence ends and emergence begins. The invisible weight is, paradoxically, the proof of your depth. Only those who have felt deeply, who have lived honestly enough to be wounded, carry such density. It is a sign that you are alive, that your heart has been open, that your choices have mattered. Without it, life would be shallow, flat, and without contrast. With it, life bends, twists, and demands that you engage with your own evolution. Imagine for a moment that you could place this weight outside of you. Imagine you could see it not as an enemy, but as a dense star, burning, compact, but holding within it the potential for light. You would no longer see yourself as cursed. You would see yourself as entrusted with a task, to unlock what has been compressed, to release the energy trapped in the knots of memory and silence. This first step is recognition, not escape, not denial, not immediate fixing. Recognition, to sit in the awareness that what you feel is real, that the heaviness is not laziness, not lack of will, not personal defect, but the physics of emotion. Every unexpressed truth has mass. Every hidden grief has density, and density accumulates. The invisible weight and the breaking point. This is where the journey begins. It is not about learning something new from the outside, but about facing what has already been living inside you. It is about seeing the pressure not as the enemy, but as the signal that your consciousness is ready to shift into another state. The signal that your life cannot remain in the old orbit. In this recognition, there is dignity. In this recognition, there is honesty. And in this recognition, there is the first taste of freedom. For when you name the weight, when you admit the breaking point, you step out of illusion and into the raw gravity of truth. And truth, no matter how heavy, always carries the seed of liberation. Every field in existence bends beneath pressure. The cosmos is a tapestry of forces curving space, drawing bodies toward one another, keeping planets in their orbits and stars in their constellations. But there is another field, quieter and more intimate, where gravity writes its script, the human psyche. Here, the forces are not measured in newtons, but in unshed tears, unfinished words, and unresolved truths. This is where the architecture of invisible gravity is constructed. At first, you believe your choices are free. You wake, you move through your day, you act, you decide. Yet beneath those decisions flows a hidden river of influence. Old experiences that were never dissolved sit beneath the surface, like massive stones buried in soil. They create currents, guiding your feet, even as you tell yourself you walk by your own will. These are not illusions, they are real. They are the mechanics of the quantum weight. The psyche does not simply remember, it accumulates. Memory is not passive. Memory is alive. Each moment left unresolved is not stored as a neutral file in the mind. It is stored as a particle with density. That density bends the personal field. It curves your perception, shifts your expectations, and alters the probabilities of your encounters. Without noticing, you orbit around the same kinds of people, the same kinds of losses, the same kinds of betrayals. It feels like fate, but it is architecture. Think of a planet orbiting a star. The planet believes it travels freely, yet every step of its path is curved by an unseen pull. The same is true of the human soul under the influence of invisible gravity. You meet faces that mirror the old wound. You enter rooms where the same silence echoes. You repeat the same conversation, convinced that this time it will end differently. Yet the arc always returns to the same conclusion. This is not punishment. It is physics of the unseen. Invisible gravity is the architecture of unfinished experience. Each hidden grief is a black stone placed in the foundation. Each silenced truth is a weight embedded in the walls. Each act of self-betrayal is another layer added to the ceiling. And with time, you find yourself living not in a free space, but in a cathedral built from your unspoken history. Its echo shapes your every word. Its shadow follows you through every corridor. And though you may paint the walls with bright colors, though you may decorate with achievements, the weight of the stones remains. The danger is not only heaviness. The danger is distortion. Invisible gravity alters perception. It bends how you see yourself, how you interpret the world, how you imagine the future. It can make opportunities appear threatening, kindness feel suspicious, or silence sound like rejection. It can transform possibility into impossibility before you even take a step. And you do not realize that it is not the world that has shifted. It is the lens curved by the unseen architecture inside you. This gravity is not only personal, it is collective. Entire families, entire cultures carry shared weights. Patterns of silence, inherited shame, generations of fear. They crystallize into fields that bend reality for those born within them. A child steps into a story written long before their birth, carrying echoes of wars never fought, betrayals never healed, and grief never spoken aloud. They believe the weight is theirs, when in truth it belongs to centuries. This too is the architecture of invisible gravity. Yet within this architecture lies hidden potential. Gravity is not only a force of collapse. Gravity is also a force of coherence. Without it, planets would scatter into chaos. Without it, galaxies would dissolve. The same is true of the psyche. The weight that bends you is also the weight that holds you together. The unfinished experiences that distort you are also the seeds of depth, the reason you are not shallow. Invisible gravity, while binding, also contains the blueprint of transformation. The key is recognition of structure. To walk blindly within the cathedral is to remain its prisoner. To pause, to look, to trace the architecture, to admit that the stones exist, is the beginning of change. When you map the unseen, you reveal where the pressure is strongest. You discover which memories are anchors and which are chains. You learn that what you thought was personality may, in truth, be residue. And in that moment, choice begins to return. Invisible gravity explains why repetition is so difficult to escape. It explains why you find yourself at the same threshold again and again, as if life itself were mocking you. But repetition is not mockery. It is the insistence of the field. Until the mass is addressed, the orbit cannot change. The same lesson repeats, not to punish, but to draw your attention to the place where density resides. The loop is not cruelty, it is instruction. Every field can shift. Every structure can be reconfigured. But the process is not intellectual. You cannot think your way out of gravity. You must feel it. You must step into the density, name the stone, allow the grief, speak the silence. Only then does mass begin to dissolve. Only then does the orbit widen. Only then does the architecture of invisible gravity begin to open into space. At the core of this lies a paradox. What you fear most is the very material of your liberation. The stone you avoid, the silence you deny, the grief you bury, these are the very keys to loosening the architecture. Every attempt to escape without facing them only deepens the orbit. But each act of courage to stand in the presence of the weight transforms the field itself. And so, invisible gravity is both prison and path. It is the unseen law that shapes your repetitions, and it is the raw energy that fuels your awakening. Once you recognize its architecture, you begin to see the doorway hidden in its walls. You realize that the field does not only bend, it can be retuned. You recognize that you are not condemned to orbit forever. The stones can be lifted, one by one. The cathedral can become a temple not of silence, but of resonance. This is the second stage of the journey. To admit that the gravity is real, to study its structure, to see its patterns not as fate, but as design. For only what is seen can be transformed. And what is transformed no longer binds. Life has a way of whispering before it shouts. The first time you encounter a pattern, it feels like coincidence. You meet someone whose voice carries the same undertone as a figure from your past. You find yourself in a situation that echoes an earlier wound. You tell yourself it is random, that the world is wide, that chance can explain it. But the second time the pattern returns, something in you stiffens. The third time, it no longer feels like chance, it feels like design. This is the mark of quantum weight, the repetition of experience. It is as if the field around you bends reality so that you meet the same story in different disguises. A different face, a different location, but the same undertone, the same hidden script. Life repeats not because it is cruel, but because unresolved energy insists on expression. What you suppress is not destroyed. It circulates, seeking openings, and so the pattern returns again and again until you face it. Repetition is one of the most painful experiences of the human journey because it feels like betrayal by life itself. You promise yourself that this time will be different. You prepare, you strengthen, you believe you have learned. Yet somehow, at the very moment when hope seems possible, the familiar collapse arrives. The silence reappears. The wound is touched in exactly the same way. And in that moment, you feel powerless, as if destiny were mocking your attempts at freedom. But repetition is not mockery. It is memory stored in the field, replaying until it is integrated. Think of it as a loop in time, not a punishment, but an invitation. Every loop is a chance to react differently, to make a choice that was once denied, to give voice to what was once silenced. The pattern will not end until the energy within it has been released. The weight demands resolution. The mechanics of this are subtle. A hidden grief makes you drawn to situations where grief will be triggered. An old betrayal tunes your perception so that you unconsciously move toward those who will betray. It is not that you want the pain, but that your field resonates with the frequency of the unresolved. You do not see it happening. It occurs beneath the threshold of awareness. To the conscious mind, It looks like life choosing you. In truth, it is your unseen architecture shaping the path. This is why people so often feel cursed. They say, "Why does this always happen to me? Why do I always attract the same kind of partner, the same kind of boss, the same kind of collapse?" They sense the pattern but misinterpret it. They think the world is against them. They think fate has singled them out. But the truth is simpler and more demanding. The pattern repeats because the weight has not yet dissolved. There is no freedom until the loop is faced. Avoidance only strengthens it. Denial feeds it. Every time you pretend not to notice, the weight compresses further, becoming even more magnetic. Like a star collapsing into a black hole, the gravity intensifies with each silence, and so the pattern grows stronger, pulling you into its orbit with greater force. But within this painful cycle lies the seed of transformation. Every repetition offers you the chance to awaken. You cannot change the past, but you can shift the way you respond in the present. When you refuse to collapse into the old role, when you speak the word you once swallowed, when you allow the emotion you once buried, the loop begins to break. The orbit widens. A new trajectory becomes possible. It is not easy. To break a pattern is to walk directly into the weight. It is to stand in the presence of fear, shame, or grief without running. It is to allow the body to tremble, the heart to ache, the voice to speak, even when every cell screams for escape. Yet this is the only path. Freedom does not come by avoiding the repetition. It comes by entering it with awareness. The repetition is a teacher. It shows you where the wound still lives. It reveals what part of you remains unclaimed. And though it feels merciless, it is precise. Life wastes no repetition. Every loop arrives exactly where the energy is stuck. Every loop delivers you to the doorway of your own liberation. And so, the pattern that repeats is not your enemy. It is your mirror. It is the echo of your own unfinished story, returning until you are willing to write its final line. When you see this, you stop asking, "Why me?" and begin to ask, "What is this pattern asking me to face?" In that shift, the curse dissolves. The loop becomes a path. This is the hidden compassion of reality. It does not allow you to escape yourself. It does not permit you to drift endlessly in distraction. It returns you again and again to the place where healing is required, not to torture you, but to free you. Breaking the pattern is the birth of a new orbit. It is the moment when invisible gravity loses its hold, when the architecture begins to crack, when light filters into the cathedral of silence. And though it may come after years of repetition, after countless collapses, the moment you respond differently, the field shifts. The weight begins to dissolve. The orbit expands into a sky that was always waiting. Repetition ends not with luck, not with escape, but with courage. The courage to face the pattern, to walk through its pain, and to reclaim the part of yourself that was left behind. That is how the quantum weight begins to transform. Every weight that bends your life casts a shadow. It is not the kind of shadow that follows you in sunlight, but the kind that dwells in silence, the invisible double of every unspoken truth. In psychology, it is called the shadow, but it is more than a concept. It is the living archive of everything you have denied, repressed, or feared. And until you step into it, the quantum weight cannot dissolve. The shadow field is not evil. It is not a monster hiding beneath your bed. It is simply the part of you that has been exiled. It is the voice you silenced to avoid rejection, the rage you swallowed to remain accepted, the grief you buried to keep moving. Every piece of yourself, that was not welcomed into daylight found a home here. Over years, these fragments accumulate, forming a parallel self, unseen, unacknowledged, yet immensely powerful. The paradox of the shadow is this: the more you deny it, the stronger its gravity becomes. What you refuse to face takes on a life of its own. Suppressed anger leaks as passive aggression. Denied grief hardens into numbness. Buried fear shapes every choice in secret. You may convince yourself that you are in control, that you have transcended the old wounds, but the shadow knows otherwise. It pulls at you from beneath awareness, bending your path, orchestrating repetitions. To enter the shadow field is to descend into the territory you least wish to see. It is to walk into the basement of your own cathedral, where the stones of memory lie heavy, where the echoes of the past reverberate without end. Here you encounter not polished ideals, but raw fragments: the child that cried without comfort, the lover that raged without being heard, the self that dreamed without permission. They wait for you, not to punish, but to be reclaimed. Most people avoid this descent. They live on the surface, decorating the upper floors of their cathedral with achievements, possessions, or masks of perfection. They polish the windows while the foundation cracks. They convince themselves that light alone is enough, forgetting that light without shadow is flat, unreal, unsustainable. But the weight does not vanish through denial. It only grows denser, compressing into the black stone of unresolved truth. To face the shadow is to reclaim your power. The emotions buried there are not poisonous in themselves. They are raw energy. Rage, once acknowledged, becomes fire for clarity. Grief, once felt, becomes depth for compassion. Fear, once embraced, becomes intuition sharpened into guidance. What destroys you is not the presence of these forces, but the refusal to integrate them. Unlived emotions solidify into gravity. Lived emotions dissolve into freedom. The journey into the shadow cannot be rushed. It is not a dramatic leap, but a gradual descent. Each step requires honesty. Each encounter requires patience. Sometimes it begins with a dream that unsettles you. Sometimes with a sudden memory you thought was long gone. Sometimes with a confrontation in daily life that cracks your defenses. The shadow enters awareness in fragments, and each fragment is an invitation. When you meet these fragments, the first impulse is to run, to explain them away, to bury them again. But running is the old orbit. Running feeds the gravity. The practice is to stay, to breathe, to allow the fragment to speak. Perhaps it speaks as an image, perhaps as a sensation in the body, perhaps as a surge of feeling you cannot name. Whatever form it takes, the work is to hold presence, to say, yes, you belong. Yes, I will see you. This is the alchemy of the shadow field. By giving space to what was denied, you transform its density into motion. The weight begins to lose its grip. The orbit loosens. The repetition weakens. And in its place arises a fuller sense of self. Not the polished mask, not the curated persona, but the whole human being, luminous because of the shadow it contains. The culture you live in may not support this descent. Most societies fear the shadow. They reward the mask, the bright image, the controlled appearance. They tell you to smile, to be strong, to move on. But beneath the surface, the denied continues to accumulate. Entire nations carry shadows of history never spoken, wounds never mourned, violence never acknowledged. Just as individuals repeat patterns, so too do cultures repeat cycles of war, oppression, and collapse. The shadow is not only personal, it is collective. And yet, the same law applies. What is denied returns. What is avoided repeats. Only through dissent can liberation arise. To face the personal shadow is to contribute to the collective healing. To integrate your fragments is to weaken the field of repetition for those who come after. In this sense, your dissent is not selfish, it is service. To stand in the shadow is to rediscover your humanity, not the polished version, but the raw, trembling, unfinished truth of being alive. It is to admit that you are not flawless, that you are not untouchable, that you contain contradictions. And in that admission, something extraordinary occurs. Compassion. Compassion not as pity, but as the recognition that every human being carries weight. Every human being bends beneath invisible gravity. Every human being walks with a shadow. The path of transformation is not to eliminate the shadow, but to walk with it, to bring it into dialogue, to let it sit at your table, not as an enemy, but as a guest who has long waited to be acknowledged. When you do this, the shadow softens. Its gravity lessens. It no longer needs to orchestrate repetitions, for it has finally been heard. The fourth movement of this journey, then, is not escape, but descent. Not flight into light, but courage into darkness. To enter the shadow field is to step into the heart of the weight. And there, in the place you most fear, lies the power you most seek. Every descent has a purpose. No one enters the shadow merely to drown in it. The shadow is not the destination, it is the threshold. What waits beyond it is fire, the elemental force of transformation that consumes the old and forges the new. The human soul is not fragile glass. It is more like metal. It bends, it endures, it can be reforged. But metal requires fire to change. Without heat, it stays locked in its old shape, repeating the same rigidity forever. The psyche is the same. Without fire, without the intensity of transformation, it remains bound to its orbit, circling the weight of old wounds. Fire is the element that makes liberation possible. Yet this fire does not come gently. It arrives as crisis, as confrontation, as the breaking of what you thought could never break. It is the phone call that ends a chapter, the silence that reveals a betrayal, the collapse of a structure you thought was permanent. To the ordinary mind, these events feel like destruction. And they are. But destruction is not the end. It is the prelude to rebirth. When the fire comes, your first instinct is to resist. You want to preserve the old form, to cling to the familiar even as it crumbles in your hands. But resistance only intensifies the burn. The true path is surrender, not as defeat, but as alignment with the process. To let the fire do its work, to allow what must be consumed to be consumed, to accept that no true transformation occurs without loss. Loss is not cruelty. Loss is the clearing of space. Every old pattern must burn before a new orbit can emerge. Every mask must melt before the face beneath can breathe. Every false certainty must dissolve before truth can stand revealed. The fire does not destroy what is real. It destroys only what is false, what is rigid, what no longer serves your becoming. This process cannot be explained away with words. It must be lived. You feel it in your body, the trembling, the heat in your chest, the restless nights when sleep abandons you. You feel it in your mind, the collapse of old narratives, the silence where explanations used to live. You feel it in your heart, the ache, the rawness, the strange mixture of terror and liberation. Fire does not leave you untouched. It demands your whole being. But in the very moment you believe you cannot endure, something else emerges. Beneath the ash of the old identity lies a spark that was always there. Fire does not only consume, it reveals. It uncovers the essence hidden beneath the rubble of defenses and denials. What burns away is everything you are not. What remains is everything you truly are. This is why transformation is often mistaken for annihilation. From the outside, it looks like collapse. From within, it feels like death. But it is not death of the soul. It is death of the mask. And when the mask dies, the soul breathes. The ancient myths understood this. They told stories of phoenixes rising from ashes, of gods who descended into the underworld only to return transformed, of heroes who faced fire and emerged carrying new gifts. These were not just stories, they were mirrors of the inner process. Every human life, at some point, must walk through fire. Every life must face the collapse of the old self to discover the essence of the new. You cannot skip this stage. You cannot bypass the burn with intellect or strategy. You cannot negotiate with fire. The only way is through. The only choice is to surrender to its heat, trusting that beneath the destruction lies revelation. In the fire, you discover the truth about strength. Strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is the willingness to face pain, to allow it to reshape you. Strength is not control. Strength is surrender to the deeper rhythm of transformation. As the fire burns, the weight begins to shift. The stones of the invisible cathedral crack. The architecture of gravity loosens. You feel yourself lighter, not because the past has vanished, but because it has been transmuted. Energy once trapped in silence now moves freely through your being. Rage becomes clarity. Grief becomes compassion. Fear becomes intuition. The raw material of the shadow is forged into power. And this power is not loud. It does not shout. It does not demand recognition. True power is quiet, steady, like the glow of embers after the fire has passed. It is not the performance of strength, but the presence of authenticity. It is not domination, but coherence. In this power, others feel not your weight, but your resonance. The fire of transformation does not end in a single moment. It flickers, flares, and returns, sometimes gently, sometimes with ferocity. Each wave consumes another layer of falseness, another mask, another orbit of repetition. Each wave reveals a deeper core, a truer self. The process is not linear, it is spiral. You descend, you burn, you rise, and then you descend again. But each time, you return with more essence, more truth, more clarity. To fear the fire is natural, but to trust the fire is liberation. For once, you know that what it consumes is never essential. You no longer resist. You let it take what is false. You let it clear what is dead. And in its wake, you stand raw, luminous, unburdened. This is the heart of transformation. Not escape, not avoidance, not endless repetition, but the courage to burn, to let the old orbit collapse, to step into the flames and discover that what emerges from the ash is not ruin, but rebirth. When the fire subsides, silence follows. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of aftermath. Ash lies where old structures once stood. The orbit that held you has weakened. The stones that weighed you have cracked. You stand in a vast, open space, uncertain, trembling, yet lighter. This is the field of integration. Integration is not as dramatic as descent or fire. It does not shout, it whispers. It is the slow, patient weaving of fragments into a whole. After shadow has been faced, after fire has burned, the pieces of yourself scattered across time begin to return. They come hesitantly, like children long abandoned. Each carries a story, a memory, a truth once denied. And each asks the same question: do I belong now? The answer must be yes. For integration is the art of belonging. It is the act of welcoming back every fragment, not as intruder, but as kin. Rage is welcomed and placed at the hearth as fire for clarity. Grief is welcomed and set at the table as depth for compassion. Fear is welcomed and given its rightful seat as the sharp edge of intuition. Nothing is banished. Nothing is silenced. Each fragment becomes a voice in the choir of the self. This work is subtle. It happens in moments that seem ordinary. You notice yourself speaking a truth you once hid. You feel a tear fall without shame. You set a boundary without rage. Small acts, yet each is a thread woven back into the fabric of being. Integration is not one great event. It is 1,000 quiet choices. But make no mistake, this stage is as vital as the fire. Without integration, transformation cannot last. Without weaving, the fragments remain scattered and the self remains divided. Many fall into the trap of seeking endless fire, endless crisis, endless drama, mistaking intensity for growth. But growth is proven not in fire alone, but in the ability to live afterward, whole and coherent, carrying the embers without burning. Integration is also reconciliation with time. For so long you have lived orbiting the past, repeating its patterns. Now the past is invited to rest. Memories that once bent your field are absorbed, digested, and dissolved. They no longer demand repetition because they have been lived through at last. You are no longer hostage to loops. The future opens, not as escape, but as possibility. There is humility in this stage, for when fragments return, you realize how much of your life was lived in exile from yourself. You see the years when you denied your anger, the moments when you betrayed your truth, the choices you made from fear. And while regret may stir, it too becomes material for integration. Regret softens into wisdom. Shame dissolves into compassion. Even your errors become teachers, voices now included in the harmony. The collective field also shifts here. Just as your personal orbit weakens, so too does the inherited gravity of family and culture. By integrating your fragments, you loosen the patterns passed down through generations. You refuse to carry what is not yours. You allow ancestral grief to rest, ancestral silence to end. This is not arrogance, it is responsibility. For every integration at the personal level is a release at the collective. What does it feel like to live integrated? It feels like coherence. Your words match your body. Your choices align with your truth. Others sense it not in what you say, but in the resonance you carry. There is no longer the weight of pretending, no longer the distortion of denial. You are not perfect, you are whole, and wholeness carries a gravity of its own. This new gravity is different from the old. The old gravity bent you into repetition, into silence, into collapse. The new gravity draws others toward authenticity. It is not control, it is resonance. Those near you feel permission to be themselves because your presence no longer hides. You are not orbiting the past, you are radiating the present. Integration does not mean you will never feel pain again. Pain is part of life, but pain no longer becomes orbit. Pain no longer becomes repetition. You can feel it, live it, and let it pass without burying it into shadow. This is the difference between suffering and presence. Suffering is the endless loop of the unresolved. Presence is the living of each moment without residue. In this stage, gratitude arises naturally, not the forced gratitude of denial, but the authentic gratitude born from survival. You look at the fire you endured and feel awe that you remain. You look at the shadow you faced and feel reverence for the strength it revealed. Even the weight that once bent you is honored, for without it, you would never have discovered your depth. Gratitude becomes not an obligation, but a song, a quiet hymn sung by the soul in recognition of its own journey. Integration is also where vision begins to awaken. For when you are no longer trapped in orbit, your gaze can finally lift. You see horizons that were once hidden by the walls of your inner cathedral. You sense possibilities you never dared to imagine. Creativity stirs, relationships shift, paths open. The energy once bound in repetition is now free to flow into creation. This is not escape into fantasy. It is the natural flowering of a soul no longer bent by weight. And so, the sixth movement of this journey is weaving. It is the gathering of fragments, the welcoming of exiles, the soft but steady labor of wholeness. It is less dramatic, less visible, but it is the true proof of transformation. Without it, nothing endures. With it, everything changes. Integration is not the end, but it is the foundation for what comes next. For once you are whole within yourself, the question arises, what does it mean to live whole in the world? The answer to that leads to the next stage, resonance with the collective field. When one person shifts, the field shifts. This is not poetry, but physics of the psyche. Every human being is not only an isolated self, but also a node in the collective field of consciousness. Your healing reverberates outward, altering the invisible architecture that binds families, cultures, and even nations. Integration does not stop at the skin. Wholeness is contagious. Think of the invisible web that links all living beings. It is woven of memory, history, silence, and expression. Every unspoken word echoes in it. Every denied grief thickens it. Every suppressed rage adds to its density. And every act of courage, every moment of authenticity, every breath of integration thins the weight of the web. This is why one person's transformation matters. It is never only personal. It is always collective. You can see this in families. The silence of one generation becomes the orbit of the next. A wound denied by the mother repeats in the daughter. A rage suppressed by the father repeats in the son. No one speaks of it, yet everyone feels the weight. Then one member of the family decides to break the pattern, to speak the word, to feel the grief, to enter the shadow. In that act, the silence is broken. The orbit weakens not only for them, but for those around them. They become a fracture in the chain of repetition, a crack through which light enters. Cultures carry shadows too. Entire nations walk with the gravity of unacknowledged history. Wars ungrieved, injustices unspoken, traumas denied. They remain in the field, repeating through cycles of violence and oppression. When individuals begin to integrate their own shadows, they also begin to see the collective ones. They refuse to participate in silence. They speak what was forbidden. They grieve what was denied. Slowly, the collective weight loosens. This is not grand politics or sweeping revolutions. It is subtler, yet more enduring. It begins in the small: how you raise a child, how you speak to a friend, how you respond when the old pattern reappears. In those moments, you transmit resonance. You show that another way is possible. Others feel it, even if they cannot name it. Your presence becomes permission. True leadership is born here, not leadership as domination, but leadership as resonance. A leader is not the one who controls, but the one who embodies coherence. When you are whole, others sense it. They feel safer, clearer, more willing to face themselves. You do not need to preach. You radiate. Your gravity is no longer repetition, but liberation. The collective field hungers for this resonance. In a world saturated with masks and noise, authenticity is rare and magnetic. People may not understand why they are drawn to it, but they feel the difference. In the presence of the whole, they glimpse their own possibility of wholeness. This stage is not without its trials, for when you begin to live integrated, you will encounter resistance. Some will try to pull you back into the old orbit, for your change threatens their comfort. Some will accuse you of arrogance, of betrayal, of abandoning tradition. But these voices are themselves echoes of the unresolved. To walk integrated is to stand firm in the resonance of truth, even when others fear it. Yet the gift outweighs the resistance. For every person you touch, every silence you break, every truth you embody, the field shifts. You may never see the full impact. You may never know how your presence ripples outward. But the resonance continues, unseen, shaping futures you will never meet. There is also a mystery here. Just as your transformation impacts the collective supports your transformation. You are not alone in the field. At times, when your strength falters, you feel an invisible hand, a book that arrives at the right time, a stranger's word that gives courage, a dream that shows the way. These are not accidents. They are signs that the field itself participates in your becoming. The collective field is not only weight, it is also resource. It carries not only trauma, but wisdom. Myths, archetypes, ancestral strengths all live here as well. As you integrate, you gain access to this deeper reservoir. You find courage that is not only yours, compassion that seems larger than your own heart, clarity that feels older than your years. The field gives back what you give to it. And so, resonance becomes a dialogue. You heal yourself, and in doing so, you heal a thread of the collective. The collective responds, offering guidance and strength. Back and forth, the dialogue deepens until you realize there was never a separation. Personal and collective are two faces of the same field. This is the hidden purpose of transformation. It was never only about your freedom. It was always about the freedom of the whole. Your weight, once dissolved, becomes space for others. Your silence, once broken, becomes voice for those still mute. Your courage becomes a beacon in the invisible web. The seventh movement of this journey, then, is resonance. To live not only for yourself, but as part of the field. To embody wholeness not as possession, but as offering. To allow your presence to ripple outward, loosening the gravity of repetition wherever it touches. And in this resonance, you begin to sense the final movement, the return to essence, the flowering of a self no longer bound by weight, shadow, or orbit, but luminous in its coherence. That is where the journey leads next. Every journey of descent and fire, every weaving of fragments, every ripple into the collective leads here, the return. Not the return to who you once were, for that self has burned away. Not the return to innocence, for innocence was never the goal. The return is to essence, the core that existed before the orbit, before the shadow, before the masks. Essence is not personality. It is not the image you show or the role you play. Essence is what remains when every disguise has fallen, when every defense has dissolved. It is the naked presence of being itself, quiet, radiant, unshakable. It carries no need to prove, no hunger to perform, no fear of silence. Essence simply is. Living from essence feels like gravity reversed. Once, the invisible weight pulled you downward, binding you to repetition. Now, the inner core radiates outward, drawing life toward coherence. You are no longer bent by gravity. You have become the center of your own field, not as domination, but as presence. The world does not orbit you, it resonates with you. In essence, freedom reveals itself, not freedom as escape, not freedom as endless choice, but freedom as alignment. You no longer act from compulsion, from avoidance, from the echoes of old wounds. You act from clarity. Each step is not reaction, but creation. Each word is not defense, but expression. Freedom is not the absence of limits, it is the absence of distortion. This freedom carries with it a quiet power, power not as control, but as coherence. Others feel it when you enter a room, not through force, but through resonance. Your presence itself speaks. It says, "Here is a being who has faced shadow, endured fire, woven fragments, and returned whole. Here is someone who cannot be bent by denial, cannot be silenced by weight, cannot be trapped in orbit. Here is essence alive." The paradox is that essence was never lost. It was always there, hidden beneath layers of survival. You did not create it. You uncovered it. You did not build it. You remembered it. The journey was not toward something new, but toward what was always yours. And yet, to arrive here, the journey was necessary. Without descent, you would never have known your shadow. Without fire, you would never have burned your masks. Without integration, you would never have welcomed your fragments. Without resonance, you would never have felt your place in the whole. Essence is timeless, but it is revealed through time. To live in essence is not to withdraw from the world, it is to engage more deeply. For essence is not fragile, it is steady. It can stand in conflict without losing clarity. It can face grief without collapsing. It can witness chaos without being consumed. Essence is not escape, it is anchor. In this stage, the need for performance falls away. You no longer seek validation, for you are already aligned. You no longer chase belonging, for you already belong to yourself. You no longer fear silence, for silence is where essence speaks most clearly. Creativity flourishes here. Not creativity as effort, but as overflow. Ideas, visions, connections flow naturally, not forced, but arising from coherence. Relationships shift, not from need, but from resonance. Work transforms, not as obligation, but as expression. Life itself becomes artistry, not because you control it, but because you align with it. The collective feels this too. When you live from essence, you contribute not weight, but clarity. You add no new orbit to the field. You transmit coherence into the web, and in doing so, you make it easier for others to remember their own essence. Wholeness ripples outward. Yet essence is humble. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply lives, steady and luminous. It knows that life will continue to bring challenge, loss, even pain. But it also knows that none of these can destroy what is real. The masks may fall, the structures may burn, the orbits may collapse, but essence remains. This is the quiet revelation at the end of the journey. You were never broken. You were never insufficient. You were never empty. You were only hidden beneath the weight, the shadow, the fire, the integration. All were not punishments, but invitations. They were the path by which you rediscovered what could never be taken from you. And so, the story closes not with triumph, not with spectacle, but with presence. You stand where you are, whole, coherent, luminous. The orbit is dissolved. The weight is transformed. The shadow is embraced. The fire is lived. The fragments are woven. The field is resonant. And what remains is essence, steady, silent, free. This is not the end. It is the beginning. For essence is not a destination, but a way of living. Every day, you will meet new shadows, new fires, new fragments. Every day, you will be invited again to integrate, to resonate, to return. But now, you know the way. Now you know that the weight is not a prison, but a path. Not a curse, but a teacher. And with that knowing, you walk into the world differently. Not searching, not fleeing, but radiating. Not burdened, but anchored. Not orbiting, but creating. For you have returned, not to who you were, but to who you truly are.